better than two.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sweet Home Catoosa. I'm your host, Richard Tharp, and today I'm privileged enough to say that this is our first of what I hope to be many citizen panels that we put together to have folks that are active in the community that can come sit down and talk about things going on in our community to bring more awareness to issues and just to have a casual conversation about things that go on in the community that maybe folks aren't aware of. And these four folks, the reason I brought these four on is anybody that pays attention here in Catoosa County, goes to the meetings or watches the meetings online, have for years seen these four participate in our county government. And I think that's important for folks to participate in county government. And if you don't participate, it's nice to have folks that do, so you can kind of watch that dialogue back and forth, and it's a check and balance in my opinion, and I welcome it. So I thought it was a great first panel to have you four on today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And what I want y'all to do is, and we talked about this, I kind of want y'all to kind of give us a background of how it is you got involved in our county government, because I think bringing awareness to issues and things like that, and you know, some of you've got stories. I know Jimmy, yours is well documented about what started, and I'll let you tell that story. But there's always something that kind of clicks and gets you engaged, and I know that happened with me as well. So without further ado, I'm not going to talk as much today, so I can give a lot of the time to these fine individuals and these folks that took time out of your day, and thank you for that, to come and talk to everybody in our community. So Christine, we'll start with you.
All right, thank you. My name's Christine Lawson. I have lived here in Catoosa for about 2 years now. My grandparents farmed here for 40 years. My mother grew up here, and I came back. I've owned a piece of the family farm for many years. And when COVID taught us we could all work anywhere and do anything, I moved back here. It was always my plan to come back here. So I built a house at my farm. After I built the house, I looked around, I'm like, well, you know, a good citizen is an involved citizen. So I went to a Board of Commissioners meeting, and I stepped right into the middle of the chicken wars.
Yeah, that was a definite topic that kind of got a lot of folks' attention and everything. So, yeah.
And that's how I got started. I met Nick actually a couple of years ago when the Healthy Foundations was trying to put up a facility here right down the road from my farm, and came and spoke at the Board of Commissioners meeting about that because I didn't think it was an appropriate facility for that location. And thankfully, we were able to convince the Board of Commissioners that that was the truth, that it was not a good fit for that area. And so I just think that if we are going to be good citizens, we need to be involved in our community and take responsibility for our own government.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think a lot of times I've spoken in front of the Board of Commissioners about the railroad down here in Graysville. And my experience was, I don't know. I don't know that it was as good as your experience necessarily, but nevertheless, I had the opportunity, right, to go and speak. And I think a lot of times when citizens do get involved and you do go and speak and everybody's voice gets heard, I've always said if you're open-minded enough, and we should be, then a lot of times maybe you have information that I don't have, right? And so when everybody gets together and starts speaking about things, it brings awareness to issues or things that are like, well, I didn't know that. I need to go back and study that a little more. And if you keep an open mind, then the end result seems to be one that everybody can agree with. So that was a good turnout. So that's great. So, Jimmy, you're up.
Yep. My name's Jimmy Gray. I was not born here, but I was raised here. I was probably since I was 4 in District 3, and went to Graysville and Ringgold and all that. And anyways, I got involved in local politics in 2022 whenever they decided to raise our county property taxes. And I was in the middle or the beginning of a recession, basically. We had 2 negative quarters of growth, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, that was the case. I'd never been to a Board of Commissioner meeting, and I did end up speaking at the first one I went to. And a majority of the people there were opposing the tax increase, but yet as soon as it came up after the 3rd meeting, it just seemed to pass immediately. And it just felt like everybody's voices were not being heard. Everybody had the opportunity to speak, but it was on deaf ears. And obviously decided to run for office and was not successful in that endeavor, but it still felt, I'm proud that what I did, and
Sure.
and stood up and tried to fight a good fight. And after I lost, I was like, what do I do now? And of course, I'm going to still be involved and participate and run the Drain the Creek on Facebook and online, and try to just keep people informed about what's going on in the community.
I saw the other day, I was watching the planning and zoning meeting, and you got up and spoke at the planning and zoning meeting. So, not only are you going to the Board of Commissioner meetings, you're going to the planning and zoning meetings as well and making your voice heard there. So, I think folks that go participate, they see you there participating and all that. So, I think that's great. And you talk about Drain the Creek. So kind of give us how that started and how long ago that's been.
Well, it started in September of 22, right after I had told Vanita I was going to run against her. I was like, no one knows me. I pretty much keep to myself. So what do I do now? And so I started Drain the Creek because I didn't want to start an elect Jimmy Gray thing before I had actually filed papers with the county, because I didn't want to have any kind of complaints, I guess, lodged against me. So Drain the Creek was, a spin on Drain the Swamp with Trump. And, just like he's got a job to drain the swamp in Washington, I think we have the same type job here in Catoosa County on, so Drain the Creek. And that's where it was, because prior to you and I running, you did a town hall after, you were in the runoff. And to my knowledge, I don't believe anybody running for local office had really put themselves out there where people can just ask you direct questions. It's been kind of maybe an interview in the Catoosa County News, which a lot of people don't see or get. And, there just really wasn't any kind of direct way to find out about a candidate.
I think there's a hole here, and I've talked about that on the podcast a lot. There's a hole here in Northwest Georgia, right? We don't get talked about on the news a lot. We don't have a lot of ways to get information out. And so you started Drain the Creek, and listen, my son was the one that told me about it. Mm-hmm. Our sons are friends, been friends, best friends still, went through high school together. And so my son said, have you seen that? And I'm like, well, no, on Facebook, I hadn't seen that. So he said, it's called Drain the Creek. So that's how I got on, and, you start looking, and it's interesting. For anybody who hasn't gotten on that Facebook group, listen, if you want to see a lot of dialogue with citizens and things going on in the county, and there's times it could get a little, and people have said, hey, Jimmy, maybe you need to intervene here because you had people get on there and they've kind of taken it a little too far. But I think that happens in a lot of areas, right?
Yeah, when you're not controlling the speech, really. You're kind of at the mercy, and sometimes things do get pushed. I know one thing in particular was somebody had posted something about the sewer in Ringgold and then calling the zoning Nazis, and that really struck a chord with some people within the government and others. But I'm just like, the end result is, the city of Ringgold, some officials didn't know about county residents having to pay sewer fees if they just had the lines running down the road, weren't even hooked into it. And now I think it's being addressed. And so, there was a benefit, even though it was a very controversial title, I suppose.
Well, it's like anything. It's a tool. And if you manage a tool well, it's a benefit. If you use it not for the benefit, if you let things go too far, then, it's not a good thing. So, it's like with you, you're having to manage that constantly. And, I've got to manage this to make sure that I've got folks that come on that benefit the community and the county and those types of things. I would never want to do something that wasn't a benefit. So, it's a lot of responsibility when you start something like that or you have those types of things. So, thanks for talking about that. So, Debbie, you're up now.
I'm Debbie Gwaltney, and I've lived in Catoosa County not quite 18 years. And I sort of came at politics a little bit differently than the other people on the panel. I'd been paying attention to things like elections, and occasionally I'd gone to a commission meeting. But what got me really involved was COVID. And so I had a couple of friends during COVID who lost their husbands, and they had essentially to drop their husbands off at the emergency room doors, and that was the last time they saw their husbands alive. They were locked out of the facilities. And I have a background in nursing, and so it is very important to me that patients in assisted living facilities and hospitals and group homes, that everyone have the opportunity to have someone with them at all times. They absolutely need an advocate. And in the state of Georgia, you know, just like everywhere else around the country, family members and advocates were being locked out. And to be honest, it simply just broke my heart. And so I became involved with a group in 2021 that was trying to get legislation on the state level that would allow someone who was in, in an acute care facility, in a long-term care facility, to have someone with them to be their advocate. And unfortunately, it failed terribly in 2021. And the end result, the end bill was almost worse than not having any bill at all. And so then we continued to push, and then this year we managed to pass No Patient Left Alone. And so anyone who is hospitalized in a long-term care facility, from the minute they enter that facility, are now allowed to have one person with them to act as their aide, their advocate. It was a big struggle. The most impressive thing was that it passed unanimously in both houses, and it is a good bill. And as part of that, I began then to look more closely at local things, not just state things, but also as part of that, I had to do a lot of research, and I had to educate myself. I had to even go back and go figure out how exactly bills are introduced and passed into law in the state of Georgia, because in the United States, it's not always the same between all of the states. There are variances between the states. And so that's sort of my thing, is doing research. And because I have to educate myself, I know that there are a lot of people out there who are as uneducated as I am or was, and they don't have the time to do the research. So I kind of have taken it upon myself to be the person who does the research. So I do spend a lot of time on Drain the Creek and other Catoosa County Facebook pages, and I sort of have taken it upon myself to be that, I don't know, that resource point, maybe you might want to call it, because the last thing I want to do is put out an uneducated opinion. And so I try and make sure that I've done the research, that I can be a positive source of information for people. And I try to make sure that I always link my sources, and, quote my resources and all of that, so that people they don't at least have to do the search process. Then the link is right there. They can then go and do the rest of the research, the reading, that kind of stuff for themselves to help them form their own opinions. So that's kind of how I came into it. And when I don't speak at meetings nearly as often as these other three people do. I will go to meetings, but when I do speak, again, I want to come from a point of fact and not just opinion. And so I do try and, make sure that everything that I say is based on research into what goes on in Catoosa County, what goes on in the state of Georgia, because we're influenced heavily by both. So I guess that's where I come from.
I was on there yesterday looking around, and first is, you made a good point. There's a lot of uneducated opinions that come out on Facebook, right? And a lot of times that's how bad things happen as far as misinformation being spread. One person comes on and they don't do all the research, or they don't, know all the facts, but they give their opinion essentially, and then somebody else sees it and says, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know that," and then here it spreads like wildfire, right? And the next thing you know, everybody's running around saying that same thing, but it's not a fact. And it's hard to go back and change that. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
So I was on there yesterday. We'll probably talk about it here in a little bit, but you were talking about the House bill that passed, and you kind of went through some things, and there was some things in there, and I'm like, well, yeah, I didn't realize that. So here again, it's educating for me as well, and that's one of the things I do like about when I click and I see your comment. Usually they're longer, right? But there's everything there, and it's like, okay. You know, and you don't do it in an attacking way. I'll say that. I mean, you don't really come back and say, yeah, listen, that's uneducated opinion. You just say, hey, listen, I've done some research and here's what I found, and you lay it out. And I think that's a positive thing. I mean, you know, it's like in the old days when I grew up, you'd throw out an encyclopedia and you'd find the subject and you'd get the facts.
Right.
And, you know, Facebook is good for that at times, but Facebook's also good for getting something that's not right. And it's spreading. And the next thing you know, you have a lot of upheaval and things going on. And if it happens to be an individual that something's not accurate about, that's pretty damaging. Yeah, I appreciate that. So,
well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
You put a lot of pressure on me, though.
No pressure, no pressure. I just, you know, I mean.
Because you were like, I know when I see something from you, I know that it's been researched, and I'm like, oh gosh.
But that was my opinion, right? But I think it's factual. I think anybody that goes on there and reads your comments, I mean, I've never seen anybody come back and say, Debbie, wait a minute now. That's not right. That's one thing I will say. I've never seen that, right? And not to say that we don't all make mistakes, because I'll make my fair share on a daily basis, but I don't see that with your comments. I'll see that, and there might be a rebuttal, like they don't like what you're saying, but they don't come back and say what you're saying is not accurate. And that's what people appreciate about that, right? Because it is a good place to go and get information. And Jimmy, to drain the creek, there are good things that come out of that, because there is information that comes out of there, right? So for every, you know, negative, there are some positives, right? And that's a place that a lot of people go and dive into and click and say, okay, let me go back and see if there's any new comments, and they're reading through the comments. And like you yesterday, this was 3 weeks ago, this post happened, but yesterday you went on there and here it is, you know, it's along and it's about that, and I'm reading through going, hey, you know, I didn't know that. And we'll talk about that because it's something very relevant right now to what's going on with taxes and in Catoosa County. But I don't want to leave Nick out. So you're like a grand poobah, Nick. You've been kind of at this a little longer than some of the, well, you know, me and a lot of folks, right? So kind of give us your origin story.
Well, you know, I mean, I've lived in the county for almost 30 years now. My family has been here since 1838. So my family is here before it was a county, right? And, you know, I love this county. I love where I live in District 4, up and around that area. My grandparents, they lived in Apison. And it's something that I've always kind of wanted to, whenever I was a young man, come back to here and set up roots back in my home place of area, right? That's what I've done. I've been living in this area now for 30 years, and in 2019, I've always kind of looked at politics and have always kind of been involved in one area or another, whether it be on a national level, like with the net neutrality thing back in 2014. You know, that was one of those things where you were talking about misinformation. People were so confused about it, and there was this big push. And it was actually, people thought it was against the cable companies for being able to throttle your internet, which it was really because you have all these large companies that were coming online, like AOL with their I mean, not AOL, Amazon with their push for streaming, Netflix with their push for streaming, and these big companies and corporations that now was increasing the bandwidth. What the cable companies was trying to do is they were trying to say, you big companies pay so that we don't have to charge the clients that we have currently, the consumers, for increasing all of this infrastructure to take care of that, right? So there was this big thing, and so I was kind of part of that and involved in educating people on that of net neutrality back then. Local politics, I've kind of just always, in 2011, 2010, I've been a touch base here and there, you know, whenever we did our comprehensive plan in 2011, I was part of that board, and I came in and helped out with some of that in 2011. And the latter part, you know, I started my business in 2016 and was trying to grow my business. So I was really focused on just that. But in 2019 is whenever there was I saw this come across a feed of that the county was going to start making people sign up to speak, do these rules. You got to have it in hand to the clerk by noon on a Monday to be able to speak at a meeting on Tuesday evening. I'm like, that's just ludicrous. Why? Because you think about it, there's elderly people, there's people with disabilities, and they may not come to the meetings all the time. But that just really puts a barrier in front of somebody and allowing them to come and speak freely at a meeting to actually give the information to their representatives that they feel like that they need, to have that discussion. And to be denied that because you wouldn't turn a paper in by 12 noon on a Monday, that really ticked me off. And so that's what really put me in gear. So that was August of 2019. And I did not know that whenever I got engaged, that within 2 weeks later, what Christine was talking about in 2019, that there was this Healthy Foundations project that was going to be going up in District 4 in our area. And that was one of those projects that me working in construction, knowing and understanding senior living communities and facilities and so on and so forth that were at this size, whenever I saw a $50 million project on 200 acres of land, I immediately went, whoa, because whenever I'm looking at a senior living project that I was working on at that point in time, that was $48 million on 17 acres of land, I knew something was not right in their equations. And that got me to thinking back to whenever we had the hospital debacle in 2013, where that now what's going to happen here? How's the taxpayer going to be put on the hook? We've seen in the 2008 national thing, too big to fail, right? Well, we continually see that in local areas as well with projects and things that it seems like that it's with the hospital that we had here in Catoosa County, whenever Tri-State Hospital was, or I guess it's Hutchison at that point, was too big to fail. And so government taxpayers shored it up. Well, it failed. And whenever it failed, guess who was on the hook for paying that? Taxpayer, right? So not only that, then there was also, and within those 2 week period, and it was crazy, there was that with the speech, that with the Healthy Foundations, and then I think you know about this one where they were talking about down here at the mill, destroying the dam, taking the dam out down here at the mill, and some organization that was there wanted to buy it and raise the money to buy it and then give it to the county. And they wanted to destroy the mill, destroy the dam. And of course the historian was there telling her, saying that this is, and there was a lady that was there that, she said, was talking about how the species of the fish, it's proven that the species of a fish will eventually go extinct if they don't have this way to traverse in the waterways, and that dam impedes that. And I'm like, well, that just doesn't make any sense. Miss Historian, I raised my hand, I was like, Miss Historian, how long has the dam been there? And she's like, oh, it's been there 125 years. I said, how long, what's the longest that it takes for a fish to go extinct? And there was a guy from Georgia there that was the University of Georgia, and I asked him, and he goes, well, a lake sturgeon can, 50 years. And I said, well, ma'am, those fish you're trying to save, they're already gone, And so I kept seeing these patterns, and there was people that whenever I would go to the meeting and speak, they would say, oh, you need to look at this. And I'm like, I'm not here for that. I don't want to look at that. I'm just here to talk about this. And it's like, oh, no, you really got to look at this. I don't want to. I just want to speak on what I need to speak on, and that be it. And as I continue to dig into research like these folks have, I continue to see that there's this dot that connects this dot, and then there's it. And then the next thing I know, I have no choice but to look at this because it connects to everything else that I'm researching on. And then whenever I come to realize, anything that I did on a national level back in my earlier days, whenever I was a young man in my 30s, it meant nothing to what my pocketbook and my privileges on my property, my rights to my property was here locally. Because I've never had anyone from, the president's cabinet or anyone that's on the national defense or anybody like that that's ever come and tried to tell me how I can live on my property. I've never had anybody on a national level tell me how much taxes I need to pay for living on my property. That all happens local. So then I got to thinking, okay, what impacts me the most in my life whenever it comes to government? Federal, state, or local? It's local. And for me to be kind of hoodwinked over this and having this kind of like the bug zapper, you know, the attraction that's there on a national level, I was like, I can no longer think this away. I have to revert. I have to come back. I have to come down to this level. And so that's whenever everything that I was seeing, I started promoting and talking to others and focusing this and almost kind of just going out as a mission and saying, how can I bring people more to this local scene? How can I influence people to understand that this is what impacts your life more, and this is personal to you in this in the roles of government? And
Real
how can I
quick
get
on
them to
that.
focus on that?
It's still a problem.
It
Because
is.
how many people voted in the primary?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
7,000,
Yeah.
right? Roughly. And how many people voted in the general election,
Right.
Exactly.
right? Over 30,000?
Right.
Yeah.
Same amount of citizens are in the county, but you've got a primary which is predominantly what? Locally focused on your local officials. But everybody's still focused on national, right?
Right.
Because we had 70 something percent, 77, 75.
71. I can get
There we go, folks. See, here we go. 71%, right, Debbie?
Yeah, I think
Of
around in there.
registered
Yeah, of
voters
registered voters, yeah.
showed up to vote
Yeah.
here in November, right?
Yeah.
But you only had 17% show up
Right.
in the
In the
primaries,
primary.
which is predominantly all local leadership.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Nick, keep going. I'm just sorry to interrupt, but
No,
that's it's still a problem, is what I'm saying.
It is.
You've been 2019, but here we are 2024. It's 5 years later, and it's still just as big a spread as it's ever been.
That's right. But in 2019, I didn't see any of these people.
Nope.
Right. In 2020, I didn't see any of these people. In 2021, whenever I was about ready to give up, things started happening because of a chicken. You know, because the chicken board thing actually brought more people to focus on local, because now you are telling me how what animals I can have on my property, how I'm going to live on my property. This now became something that was personal to them. And that's what you usually see in government as well, with the interest in government. Nobody wants to be interested in government. Nobody wants to know about what's going on until it is impacting them personally.
Sure.
Now they're engaged, right? And after the engagement, there's people you take, it's kind of like an ebb and flow, right? There's an increase each time. It's almost like watching stocks, right? You got a good stock that's going, but it's a long-term stock, right? It's not something you're going to get a short on, right? So you've got what I'm seeing now is I'm seeing people nationally wake up. I mean, we saw that in the elections,
Sure.
where there's this huge
Pushback
awakening.
against the machine, as
That's
everybody
right.
call it, government, and what goes on. And everybody has the same perception I do, and I'm sure you four do, is, you know, it's dirty behind the scenes, right? It's
Yeah.
all set up to benefit not the average everyday folks. It's set up to benefit the machine.
Right.
And finally, we had somebody in Trump, which is kind of ironic, you know, him being a businessman and being, you know, it's funny because he was friends with a lot of these folks that
Right.
are totally against him now. But he came in and said, you know, hey, you know, and I guess that's what happens when you get of a certain age. You kind of get that where I don't care anymore. I'm going to do what's right. I've kind of stuck my flag in the ground. I've lived my life. I've gotten to a point now where I'm comfortable and I'm good, and now I can start to push back a little bit. But that's what he did, right?
Yeah.
Push back big time. And yes, on a national level, you saw that. Now, wouldn't it be nice on a local level, which is what you're wanting to see, to have that same kind of pushback to say, hey, and this year we had another thing that happened with taxes, like with the chickens. And so all of a sudden there's a whole nother group that got involved because that impacted pretty much everybody.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you see
Absolutely.
the same thing with the school board. What happened last year with the school increase in taxes? You see more and more people start to realize that what affects me the most in my pocketbook, in my home life here in this county, is my local government. And as we continue to go, throughout, not just on a national, state, and local, you're starting to see things change. You know, whenever you have a machine that has to feed itself, that has to be able to have a continuation, it has to feed itself, right? What you see is you also see ways of being able to promote that. You see ways for media and advertisement in ways that is in some ways propaganda, in being able to bring people to that thought of, okay, I'm doing the right thing by saying yes or by saying no. One of the things that I did is redevelopment powers. That was in 2021, November 2021 election, 2022 election. Yeah. No, it's 2021 because it was the off year that they were pushing this redevelopment powers. So it's saying that we want you to give the citizens, you've got to vote on this referendum to say that you're going to give this power. Why would it be called redevelopment powers? And you're asking for me to have this power in order to being able to do this, right? Well, just like Debbie, I'll ask people. I ask my local officials. I ask as far as commissioners. I ask the city, because this would affect the city and the county, to educate me on this. And they could not really educate me on this. So then the county had someone, I don't think it was the county because I don't think they can be involved in doing this in a way, but there was a setup that was there for the colonnade. To have an attorney to speak on this, to educate the public. And there was some great questions there. And I saw even the mayor of Ringo there to kind of, educate himself on it, right? There was only 15 citizens. This was going to impact the entire county, but there was only 15 citizens there to be educated on something that was so impactful. And they did not realize how impactful it would have been, because if they would have voted yes for this redevelopment powers, they would have never been able to vote no again. Yep. Ever. The only way that you can pull this back is for the governor himself or herself, whoever's in that governor position, to actually end it. There's no other way. It's based then on one person to being able to end that. And you put all that power into that one person, and you took all the power away from the people. I myself went to not only the Republicans, but the Democrats as well. And I educated myself prior to doing this and put PowerPoint presentations together to show. And the way that I educated myself is I wanted to know where it came from. How did it start? And what would it look like over a legacy of time? Well, where it started at was California. In the legacy of time, I contacted this state representative, who was a state representative, Chris Norby. And Chris, him and a bipartisan of folks who were fighting against this in California to end it for 20 years. And it finally took a bipartisanship and a Democrat governor, actually, Jerry Brown, to end this in 2011 in California. When they did, what happened is that $500 million went back to local municipalities. $1 billion went back to the school system. So this is the road that was being pushed on us. And the uneducated voter here in Catoosa County had no chance of knowing what was good and what was bad.
But don't we see that a lot anyway? I see that a lot. It's like something will get put out to be put on a ballot or whatever. And a lot of times there is no education piece that comes before it, right? I mean, the House Bill 581.
We saw that in November.
Is a great point,
example,
right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's still scratching their heads of what is this, right? Because there's some people that think, okay, it passed. Now I've got the potential of having no property taxes, which is not the truth, right? Because the school board's not impacted, and the school board's a majority of your bill.
That's right.
But there's never that education piece, and then sometimes you'll see it come after the fact.
Right.
You see it come after the fact and being like, okay, here's what you have now. Now that we voted in, or you'll see something that gets voted, like this is a great example. The citizens, by overwhelming majority in Catoosa County, more than the state, said we want this. But now there's people out there that are trying to say, well, wait a minute, there may be some bad things in this, and we want to educate you on what those bad things are in this. And it's like, well, shouldn't that have been talked about before the vote? So that educational piece just doesn't get put out there. And Jimmy, like with town halls, you talk about, I'm going to have a town hall and all that, and then you see how many people show up, and you're like, wow, you would think there'd be more engagement, right? I had it here, had the same thing. You thought there'd be more engagement. People just seem to get their, and Facebook seems to be the default, right? They get their information from small spaces, and they get it in a period of time when it's convenient for them.
Right.
So when you say Tuesday at 8 o'clock, I'm going to have a town hall meeting, a lot of folks don't make that or can't make that or don't want to give up that time. That's their time that but they may be sitting there at 9:30 on a Saturday morning, and if it was recorded, they'll catch it then, right?
Right.
Because it's convenient for them. And so it's so hard now because that educational piece you talked about, that's the problem.
That's right.
There's just not a lot of education that goes, or it comes after the fact, and it's like, well, why didn't we educate ourselves before?
And there's the propagandist that's there as well within our local government for things like whenever you look at the SPLOST, right? Whenever you look at the SPLOST and you look how the county promotes the SPLOST, they look at it from the standpoint of roads, emergency management services, and that's about it, right? That's the way that it's promoted.
It is, right? And paving seems to be the number one thing that gets talked about.
Yeah.
The signs will go out, and I've talked about this. I'm like, listen, I think, and this is my personal opinion, and here again, this is why we have a panel, because we could disagree to disagree.
Yes.
I think SPLOST is a good thing. It could be used in, like any tool, in a good way.
Absolutely.
But you'll talk about the numbers here in a second that talk about the disconnect, right, from what we promote to what we spend. But that's the thing, right? But it seems to be when it gets talked about the most is about 4 months before the vote.
Right.
And signs go up everywhere and things are going on to promote, hey, this is why we need it and all that. And it's like, that was a 4-year or 5-year cycle.
Or 6-year now.
6-year now. Why aren't we talking about all the things that are happening then?
Right.
And leadership that's in there now got to decide on what projects got put out for the next 6 years. So I'm going into office. I have no say on what got decided my first 4-year term.
Right.
None. And, I didn't see a lot of, and maybe I missed it, I didn't see a lot of things saying, hey, we want to have citizen involvement. Let's come down and let's talk about SPLOST and kind of give us some ideas, because y'all live in the county. You live in 4, you live in 3. So let's talk about what's in your districts or what you may have said. And Jimmy, that goes into, and I'm sure you'll touch on it too, Parks and Rec, right? Because that's in SPLOST as well. And we talk about these things. And there was an interesting commission meeting
Yes, there was.
almost 2 weeks ago about that, right? And we can talk about that. But that's the problem, right? There needs to be more communication and more citizen involvement and more ways to get the message out, and not after or whatever. So SPLOST, keep going. You got the numbers to talk about.
Well, what I did is, once again, like everyone else on this panel, I do my research, right? And so I wanted to know, and I'm kind of curious in these ways as well, just to see things and just to see number matrix and things like that. I don't know.
You're the budget guy. I mean, listen, Daddy's the researcher, Nick, and most people know you as the budget guy, right? Because you could pour numbers out of a budget from 2015, it seems like, right?
Well, and that's what I looked at. I wanted to see what the SPLOST were in the last 3 SPLOST cycles, where it was a 5-year cycle, the last 3 SPLOST cycles, which went from 2009, 2014, and then 2019, right? And I wanted to see in those SPLOST, if you're promoting this as being for fire and roads, the fire department, police department, sheriff, emergency services, roads, right?
That's a big push, right?
If that's what you're promoting,
correct.
How much are these people actually receiving for their capital expenditure projects that they're wanting to have done? And then, so with that, over a 3-year period, or 3 cycles, right? You had a total of $176 million to be collected in those 3 cycles, those 15 years, right? In $176 million, emergency services only received $20 million. The fire got $12 million, the sheriff got $8 million. That was a big flag for me, right? And saying, okay, well, let's just go ahead and go to the roads. How much out of $176 million did the roads receive? That was at $36 million. So 36 out of 176. Now you're telling me this is going to pave my roads and help keep me safe and secure. My fire insurance is going to be lower and all this stuff, right? Because if you look at that and just saying the roads and the fire, that's not even a third of what was collected, right? And so a lot of people say, well, where's all the rest of it? And I'll tell you, just like I tell everybody else, you do the research and you find out for yourself. Because I don't want people thinking that, well, he said this once again, right? The research is there. The only thing you got to do is just ask for the last three, the 2019, 2014, and the 2009 budget and compare the numbers. They're one line item numbers. It's easy math. But that was an issue, right? That was an issue for me because then I wanted to, a lot of people said, you're against the SPLOST. I'm not against a 1 cent sales tax that's spread out amongst everybody that takes the burden off of Miss Susie, who is a widow lady that's trying to make up for her property tax this year. I'm not against that, but I'm for proper spending. And don't tell me that you're spending it on this and then you've got this huge fluff that's on the backside that you're not explaining and you're not educating the people as to why you need this. Here's what I found with SPLOST. A lot of times it's based upon a budget, an overall number, right? Here's our target number that we want to hit. Departments, bring to me your wish list.
Yep, that's exactly how it works.
That's it.
That's exactly
Because
how
this
it works.
SPLOST cycle, 6 years, and they estimate $96 million, right? That was the estimate that got put out. So
Yeah.
over 6 years, this is what we just went into, starting in June.
That's-
So
yep.
we're in it now.
Yep.
Over that 6 year period, 96 million will be brought in. And if it's more, then that's great. It'll be there as well. But 96 million, so we've got to have projects to go out over 6 years. So yes, the message is always centered around those three things. Fire, so emergency services and paving. They don't talk about the other things. Well, the other things do get talked about, and they got talked about at the commission meeting here at last, right? And I'm not trying to. It's just facts, right? So
It is. It
I think
is.
part of it too is what is the proper role of government? I'm an old Reagan government person, small government. I think government should be for the emergency services, the police, the fire, the schools, and the roads.
And bridges and stormwater.
Well, that goes along with the roads.
That's right.
Yeah, so
That goes
Sure.
along with
Those
all
things
that.
are lumped into that budget.
Infrastructure. It's not for amphitheaters. It's not for for ball fields. And I lived in Atlanta for 20 plus years. My kids did Little League. All of those were owned by 501c3 private organizations that were not funded by the government, and they were beautiful. They were awesome.
Yeah.
But they were not put on the backs of the taxpayers.
yeah, and so to disagree, right?
It's
and no, and it is.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying because I'm a Reagan person too, right? Yeah, I mean, like, how lifelong Republican? Where did that start? At Ronald Reagan, right? I mean, I was 10 to 18 when he was
Our
in
generation.
office. So, boy,
Yeah.
we talk about formative years. That was it for me, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what I want to see because I saw the economy, I saw the job growth, I saw just everything was going great, right? So I agree with you. But I look at situations and like if you look at downtown Chattanooga, it was bad, right? And somebody stepped up and said, hey, we've got to do something. So they started with the aquarium,
Yep.
down there, right? That centerpiece, and a lot of people thought, that's crazy. Why would you put something so nice and something so bad? But the idea was, if we center that around, we can build it. And if you look at it today, that plan worked. The economy for like Catoosa County, or look at East, or if you look at East Ridge is another great example. They did Camp Jordan,
Yeah.
and they did all that infrastructure there and everything, right? So the tax revenue that comes in, and the tourism and all that comes with it is great, right? And so I think there's a good balance there. What happens, and what I disagree with, is if you have taxpayer dollars paying for something, but you have private citizens that are profiting off of
Right.
it
Right.
immensely.
Right.
So it's like we're basically, taxpayers are footing the bill for somebody to be a profiteer.
Yes.
That's where the disconnect comes in because, I'm sitting here at Thatcher's barbecue down the road here, and there was a ball tournament in town. My wife and I are sitting in there. Here comes a party of 8. And they had ball uniforms on, and I'm like, see, that's great, right? Because that's what it's designed to do. It gets folks here, they're from out of town, they come, they stay in a hotel, the cities get the tax off of that. The restaurants, the employees, that trickle down money, that's great. But what folks get upset about is that, right?
Right.
We're footing the bill.
Well, and also what happens, as in the case of what's going on right now, what happens when a person who's part of that government entity is also benefiting as a private citizen. And that really gets under people's skin.
That's right.
That
And Jimmy, you put it on Train to Creek. I mean, here you go.
It makes you wonder. I mean, I've had conversations with Charlie over the couple years, and he's a fine man, and I just wonder why. Because Jeff Long got on TV 2 days later and brought up the conflict of interest. And if he had that concern on Thursday, why didn't he say something at the meeting on Tuesday? And then the county attorney was sitting there as well. And so why was he even allowed?
So was the chair. The chair who runs.
And I went back and watched the video. I didn't watch the meeting that night. And I went back and watched that hour-and-a-half interaction. And it was clear, they were asking Charlie, about tournaments and how it works and last-minute cancellations and why that would happen. And so it was very clear that everybody knew that he was part of the softball associations. And so, yes, I mean, that's, I've taken heat during the campaign about being, anti-rec. I mean, I was, bashed on TV and whatever else. And, I don't believe the government needs to be in the recreation business, but I certainly don't believe we need to, basically like what you said, foot the bill, do the $2 million upgrade at the Poplar Springs ball fields a couple years back. And, we're investing $2 million there, but yet we have a fire station in District 4, Blackstock, that's sitting empty.
Yep.
And so why that, that's the problem I had with SPLOST is, you have $2 million to spend here, but really what you should be focusing on is the first responders, because every tax time, that's what we hear. We got to raise taxes because to pay the first responders more. And that rarely happens because we're still not paying them. But anyways, you have private organizations profiting greatly. The umpires are making more money on a weekend than what the county is for even providing the facilities.
Yeah, and I think it's talked about, and I'm definitely going to explore, is bringing it in-house, right? Not letting, in other words, have our own rec program to do that, to keep the money in-house for the taxpayers, basically to pay for itself.
Right.
Then that's a business, right? You want to be able to generate enough revenue to pay for itself, right? And that's the end goal, and I think that's a great one. And I said on there, I was there on that show that night, and I said, I really, what I felt like was, my wife said it, she's like, I've never heard Charlie talk that much on a topic, right? I mean, he's asked questions and he participates, but I've never heard him really get into it that way. And I said, really my thought is I think since he's in that and he does that, I think he just switched hats for a minute and kind of got carried away into the business part, right? And he just really got into that because, it was eye-opening, and a lot of folks and saw it online. And Nick, you had it on CSI. And there was people commenting like, why didn't he recuse himself? And I think in hindsight, I know he's probably like, wow, that was a mistake, and we all make them, right? But I think he just got carried in the moment away with that, right? Because a lot of citizens, and here again, Citizen Pam are looking at, hey, wait a minute, red flag, it's somebody who's profiting. But you're voting on that, right? And so you're right. There was, there could have been several different mechanisms clicked to say, hey, wait, maybe, this is something you should sit out, right? But I think it also comes down to when they're sitting there, they're like, well, I don't want to make a fellow commissioner, I don't want to point that out, and make it, look bad, essentially, right? That's probably part of it. But there was many mechanisms, whether it was the chair or another commissioner or the county attorney, that could have said, hey, well, maybe we should, sit this out or look at this or whatever.
Well, when Chuck Harris was saying that's my comment is the bases are loaded, kind of playing off of what they were talking about, right? But I already saw that there was 3 votes that were going to carry because of the way the questioning was going, right? I saw that Charlie with what he was doing at Benita, and with Larry, in this inquisitive way, in this manner, I've learned the dynamics of how they operate, and I already saw this, and that's why I said, I should have I'm glad I placed my $100 bet on the DraftKings, because in that way, I knew that the 3 were going to vote that way. Yep. And seeing Mr. Harris, Chuck Harris, to say, why are we badgering? He asked the guy point blank, you know your information. You've studied on this. You've got the information. This is what you do, and you've been working on this. And each time, the director was saying, yes, sir, yes, yes. And Chuck then says, why are we continuing to badger this man, right?
Well, Alex is in my opinion, a great hire for the county. He's passionate, he's knowledgeable, and he cares, right?
I agree.
And so he saw something there that he needed to fix.
Right.
So he said, hey,
That's his
team,
job.
That's right. Hey, team, we've got a problem. So let's sit down and let's all think about this and put our hats on. And so they spent time and they did it. And those don't just get brought to the meeting. That has to get turned into the county manager. County manager has to look at it. The county attorney. I mean, there's a lot of things.
And then it has to be
go
put on the
into that.
agenda to be voted on.
Absolutely.
Right.
So it wasn't just he showed up that night and said, hey. So, yes, I mean, he said, we got an issue. It's costing the county money.
Right.
So he did his job, right? And he's like, we need to put some things in place to kind of protect us. But that was, anybody hadn't watched that, it's a good way to watch a meeting. And it was a longer meeting than normal. I mean, that segment on just Parks and Rec was, an hour and 20 minutes or more.
Which is why I do the CSI thing, right? A lot of people may or may not know that CSI is to allow that window, that view of opportunity into the government in order to help educate you and to give you a place that you can respond. The county has their website that you can go to and you can watch it as well. I try to make everything that I put on there not something but that it's just straightforward. But what I have been doing here recently is actually showing the documentation, right? And inserting that into my screen so that then the people can actually see, once again, elevating the level of education for the county people so they know what I know and see what I see, and then they can make that determination.
I call that a happy accident. Because the meeting was happening and the sound was out.
Right.
So you interjected, said, okay, this is who's here, this is who's speaking right now, this is what they're speaking about, and you threw that up on the screen. Almost like the Manning cast where Peyton and Eli get together and talk about the game while the game's going on and doing things. But it's
play-by-play.
Yeah, doing the play-by-play.
right? But I think it's a good way for a lot of folks. A lot of folks are like, well, I don't know who that is. You're like, well, they're over this department and they're talking about the vending with Coke, Pepsi, and this. But that's the information, and I think that's a good happy accident to enhance how people could watch a meeting. I think there'll be more people that would appreciate that to get the backstory to see, because they may have been there before, but like, well, they were here 6 months ago with that, and this is what happened then, and those types of things. So I think that's something you should continue to do.
Well, I'm hoping to actually, I want to keep the CSI thing more of a purist in the sense of just where people can see the video at its raw form. But I see that sometimes it just depends on how much interest is in that one meeting. What I'm really wanting to do is to do an offshoot of those and doing it towards CSI Watchdog. So then the watchdog is me, who is watching this, and then I'm commentating and I'm telling and letting people know, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You got media here, you got media with you, with what you're doing, Jimmy, Drain the Creek, me, CSI. And we're seeing this across the nation as more and more people, they don't have the confidence in the media that they get that's mainstream. That you're seeing like podcasters like Joe Rogan. I mean, boom, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And this is where the people are really taking the information, disseminating it, and diffusing it back out to the public so that then there is some means of education and elevation to our citizens that surround us, because that's how we're going to get back to this healthy living, I do believe, is whenever we start knowing the truth, having the evidence before us, to where then that way we can make a true conscious decision whenever we go to the polls or if we go to a business or whatever,
Well, the liberal media, listen, let's just call it the way it is. It's in everybody, we're not stupid. Yeah. So when you see on one news channel a message and the verbiage is such, and you can tell when they're reading a teleprompter, right? It's not just us like we are speaking from the heart and all that. And that's where Trump's great, right? He doesn't have a script he's necessarily speaking on all the time. He comes off script and tells you what he's thinking. Then you click over to another channel that's in the same situation, and they have the same message and the same verbiage and the same words. So it's let's pull the lever and let's put this out and try to brainwash everybody that this is the way we need to be, or this is how they need to think. And that's horrible. We just need to have the right information.
One thing I would love to see in our local government, and I don't do social media, unlike you guys, I don't, because I just don't have the time, and it would send my blood pressure way too high. So I don't do it. But I would love to be able to go into one of our meetings with our Board of Commissioners. Board of Planning is great about doing this, and just dialogue with them, talk to them. as it is right now, we go into a Board of Commissioners meeting, you have your 5 minutes, and we don't answer any questions, and this is a part-time job, and I'm not here to answer questions, and you need to go talk to this other person here if
Sure.
you want questions answered. Most of the time, I'm not coming in there to attack you. I have actual questions. I would love to be able to talk to you about it. And a couple of times, there's actually been some, interaction, and I think that's what would do our citizens a lot of good in our local meetings.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that it's our job as an elected official to be able to be accessible, right? There's the argument that's been put out for years, right, that the meeting would never end. Right?
Yeah.
The meeting would never end, and it goes on. But it's like, okay, so have that meeting. You've got it in this format, but maybe we need to have another outlet. Like you, CSI, now you're going to come back and do Watchdog, right? So you're going to take it as pure form, but then you're going to come over here and you're going to do something else. And I think that's an opportunity, right? We're going to do our meeting
Right.
the way we've normally done it, but then, hey, maybe we can do something else over here to give you that opportunity.
Well, and I think sort of related to that is people know when they go speak that there is not going to be any interaction, or if there is interaction from the board, 9 times out of 10, it's negative.
Yes.
And so what happens is, oh yeah, we've let you come speak, you've said your piece, but it almost inevitably feels like
Now get
the
out.
decision, well, one, get out,
Yeah.
but the decision is already made before anybody comes to speak. And even if there is some discussion after everyone has, gotten up and spoken, it just listening to the tone and knowing how everybody interacts, it truly feels like nothing that anybody said at that meeting influences the vote in any way, that it's predetermined. It's like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to let people speak because that's what we have to do. The citizens' First Amendment right is to be able to speak on, a topic that affects them. But we're going to ignore that. We're going to pay lip service to allowing people to speak. And so then people get frustrated. They're like, why should I even bother? Why should I take my time to go to a meeting and, do preparation work? Or even, because almost all of the citizens who come in, they've taken some sort of time to prepare. They have some sort of written statement that they want to refer to. They've gone and done their own research. They have points that they want to make. But it's all for naught when they go to take the vote, especially if there's been no interaction. There's been no, oh, well, you say that you referred to XYZ. Can you tell me a little more about that? And so people do get frustrated. What's the point? You've already made up your mind and you really don't care. And you can tell, you can watch board members as people are up and speaking and they're fiddling with their drink or they're whispering side to side with the person next to them, or they might be making notes, but you really get the feeling that they're not making notes about what you're saying. So I think that it basically people feel like
Disenfranchised.
we feel disenfranchised. Yeah. No matter what we say, you guys aren't listening. And so.
And I've heard the argument too. It's like, well, we've got all the information. So there's things that we know that the citizens don't know, and that's what impacted our decision.
Well, in that regard, share some of that information.
If that is true.
Right. No,
Because
I get
I've been told, oh, this is a part-time job. I couldn't know enough to answer your questions. That's why you don't get to ask them.
Yeah.
I've
Right.
been told that multiple times.
Well, I think an important thing going forward, especially, is to keep the public speaking time before new business is being heard.
Oh, no, definitely. I think that was great putting it back.
I
It's
do
right
too.
where it needs to be.
I mean, because afterwards, if you do go to the board with the comment after they've already voted, that's when it's really on deaf
Yeah.
ears because it's already
Yeah.
too late.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you bring something up to your commissioner prior to the agenda item being discussed, then you can ask your commissioner, why didn't you bring my concern up, at that time, and hold them accountable to valuing your wants and all that. So, because there was one time, and it was the Democrat chairman, Rob Nolan, he brought up a fact about the elevator contract for the courthouse. It was something to the effect that the elevator company could renegotiate part of the contract and the county had no leverage to do anything about it and couldn't renegotiate it. But by the time he had already brought it up, it was already voted on. And so, that would have been a great thing to maybe ask the person who was presenting it. So, that's my 2 cents on that.
And I got to see that pretty much during the chicken war too, where it was like always, they didn't understand HOA, government. There's a level of incompetence sometimes that I see within our government that they don't take the time to actually look at the research and or even read that of the Constitution of the state of Georgia and the Constitution of the United States. So an example of that is whenever one of the commissioners is like, don't I have a First Amendment right too? No, the contract is that for the people to have their rights against their government. You, Richard, you, Jimmy, me, Nick, on any of our platforms, we can censor somebody and that is not going against their First Amendment because we don't have that contract with them. That contract is that of the Constitution of the United States that allows us to be able to speak freely against our government. It doesn't give a citizen, it doesn't protect my right to say or whatever here. Jimmy can shut me down, shut me off, or whatever. That, and you can do the same here. Editing this, taking out my speech, whatever.
Yeah, and I've said to folks many times, I'm like, look, when you come in, we're going to sit down and talk. But if you, and I had an individual that did, they said a statistic, and when they went back later, they're like, oh, it wasn't that. It was this, right? And so we just put it in the caption, hey, it's this many miles, right, of a road or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's simple, right? But it's an editing. And I've told everybody the same thing I told y'all, right? I mean, if we get into something and we get back later and we're like, I just don't feel comfortable with that, well, we can edit it out.
Absolutely.
Right? But I'm not going to edit it out
But
because that's not my thing. I asked you to come here and I've given you the opportunity to speak. And if I don't agree with something, then I'll just sit here and say, I don't agree. We can agree to disagree.
But that's not against our First Amendment.
That's right.
That's only a government contract. That's it. But people, they don't understand that, nor did they understand that about HOA. They continue to say that we can't do this to HOAs. HOA, you know what protects an HOA from the government? Is that they are an association that has a contract with their members.
Yep.
The same thing, if you look back at 2008, so many people got so upset, so mad about all of these big executives of these big financial institutions getting these big bonuses after we bailed them out.
Yes.
Well, guess what? They had a contract with their company that they worked for, that their company, that was between them, that individual. They had to pay them. It was part of their agreement and their contract. To do that, they broke a contract which then put them liable for more money to be sued.
But it wasn't talked about ahead of time, right?
No.
In other words, when we're doing the bailout, they're like, now we just want you to know you're going to come bail us out, but we've got in this contract that we're going to get these big bonuses too,
Yeah.
Well, no, we're not going to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
We're going to keep that back in the background until we get this pushed through because that information would probably change the way it was structured.
Right.
Because if we'd have known, we'd have been like, okay, we'll bail you out, but we're going to have to take this and amend this. We're going to have to fix that. We're not going to bail you out and then you take a big bonus. But yeah.
But that's a contract. And that's what between two individuals, a contract is actually protected. It's protected to have that mutual contract.
We're checking batteries. So, folks, obviously, we usually go an hour, right? But I told them there's no way you could chop an hour and have 4 individuals come on and talk. So we're in overtime. You keep enjoying it. I was just having the check here. The batteries are good, and we're going to keep going. So let's get into y'all pick a topic here because, House Bill 581 or taxes in the county, some things that really resonate with folks watching at home. What's a big topic that we really need to discuss?
Property taxes.
I was going to say
huge.
property taxes, House Bill 581.
Those are all
Property
interrelated.
taxes.
That's one of the things. I mean, whenever I saw Jimmy come to the meeting, whenever he was speaking out about property taxes and whenever they were going to raise property taxes, if you look at the budget and you see that they have this, you're required to kind of have 3 months on surplus, right? Well, we have 6 months on surplus.
Right.
And with that, you can actually see the minimum amount that was raised in our taxes, the $2 million that's going to be covered, could have actually been covered by what we have on our reserve. I don't understand sometimes the way that they do things in our government and being able to have that reserve, but I do know that we have so much money in reserves now that we are actually, last year it was proposed and voted on to move our tax reserve monies from this bank to banks all across the country in order for it to be FDIC insured at $250,000.
Yeah.
So now we are taking our county taxpayer money and spreading it out across the country, so now more financial institutions can loan out our money to other people.
Sure.
And there is some financial gain there in a return for those financial institutions that we do not see, or nor are we a part of, nor will we ever get any of that back. So to have it to where you're looking out for the people and the interest, I think is the first thing. But to see what we have seen is that there's a disconnect. We elect our officials to go in to represent us, but we see that what we have is a representative that represents the government, not the people.
Yeah.
And that's what has really engaged us all, is that we want to be heard, we want to have the representation, and we want our people that we elect to be competent, truly do the research, and then to make a decision that we can then trust and say, I know that person did the research, I know who they are, I know how they work.
How many times have, and I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How many times have you watched a meeting or been at a meeting and a topic's come up that they're voting on, and the questions start from somebody up there going, well, what is this? Or can you tell me about this? And you think, wait a minute. The agenda packets come out on
Friday.
Correct. And so you've got till Tuesday, right? So the first thing you would think is, well, you should be pretty well versed on everything you're going to be voting on tonight, right? But, you've had them even go up there and say, well, all right, let me ask the county manager and the county attorney about this. And the red flag for me goes off, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. If you're asking their opinion, does that mean you just didn't do any research on that, right? And that goes back to you like, hey, we elected you to go in there and put forth the effort to be a part of that and make the best decision possible for the county. And part of that is you got to deep dive in there and you got to go to work, right? And we want to know. And so one of the things I said is, when I get in office, I'm going to sit right here and do commissioner talk, right? So I could talk about those things. Hey, listen, here's why I voted this way, and here was the background of that, and there's comments that can come in, and I can answer questions and things like that. Kind of like a town hall, Jimmy, but in a way that's a little better for people to participate when it's convenient for them, right? But I think I should be able to tell folks, and here's my thought behind that, and here's why I did that. And obviously, there's things in executive session, right? Personnel.
Land acquisition.
That's right. Can't talk about those things, right? But that's such a small part of really what the votes are about, why it was going on, right? And I could say, well, I thought I was going to vote for this for Alex with Parks and Rec because I think it is something that we need to do and address, and here's why, and here's some background. Talk about it. We don't get enough of that. I don't feel like as a citizen, I didn't feel like there was enough information coming out that I felt confident that somebody was putting in the effort that I felt like should have been put in.
Right.
You're hired to do a job. If I hire you to do a job and I'm paying you for 40 hours and I really feel like you're only working 20, I feel like I'm being cheated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's how we feel, right?
Yeah.
So taxes, property taxes. Yeah, in House Bill 581. So we all thought, right, and we think, this is a great thing, right? It can benefit helping us to get some burden taken off of us on the tax side. But now we're going into January, now it's been passed in for the opt-in, opt-out. And I don't know what's going to happen with that.
I don't either. I would like to think, well, it's very confusing. And I actually ended up going through and reading the bill yesterday, and then I ended up looking and found the ACCG guidance for it. They have put out at least one paper and one PowerPoint. I think they had training on it in September.
And October.
And and it's really confusing. And one of the reasons it's confusing is there are actually two parts to it.
Correct.
There is the homestead exemption portion, which is the opt-in, opt-out. And then there is the FLOST, the floating local option sales tax. And so people don't understand that while those two things are influence each other, well, actually, the homestead exemption influences the FLOST. They are not full, you can vote one way on the homestead exemption and then be influenced in a different way on the FLOST. So the homestead exemption limits there's been a lot of confusion. We had one of the commissioners who was telling people that your valuation of your home will never go up or will never go down. And that's not the case, because it doesn't even affect the valuation of your home. It affects the assessment of your home, which is based on the valuation. But what it does is limit the increase in the assessment for homeowners who have homestead exemptions to the cost of living index. So each year your assessment will only go up by the amount of inflation. And, this last appraisal increase, we had some people who had 50 or 100% increases. And so then in Georgia, in the state of Georgia, and again, this varies state to state of Georgia, our assessments are based at 40% of
Fair market value.
of the valuation. Tennessee, it's 25% of the valuation. So, and in Georgia, state law says that there is a minimal homestead exemption amount of $2,000 for each taxing entity. For the most part, there are some exceptions to that. So $2,000 exemption for the county, $2,000 for each of the individual cities, $2,000 for the schools. And I just lost my train of thought. Shostakovich. So that is actually the state minimum. So Catoosa County has only the state minimum. Other counties like Fulton County, and I often refer to Fulton and Cobb because I have kids who live there, so I know how those things go. Fulton County right now already has a homestead exemption amount that is tied to rate of inflation or 3%, whichever is less. And so their assessments each year, if you're a homeowner, have your homestead exemption in place, your assessment can each year only go up by the rate of inflation or 3%, whichever is less. That's already more than, our $2,000 exemption here in Catoosa County. So the way that HB 581 is written, we have that now tied to the rate of inflation. However, each of the taxing authorities has the ability to opt into that or opt out of that. If they opt out of that, they are saying to the citizens of the county, and especially like here in Catoosa where it passed on an overwhelming basis, we don't care that you chose to have this limit on your assessments. We're going to opt out, and we're going to continue to completely tie the assessments to the valuations, and we're going to work above the rate of inflation. And I have heard some people say, well, then we're going to be tied to our budget is going to be stuck at 2024 levels. That's not the case, because at the very minimum, you have the rate of inflation that your budget for those homesteaded homes is going to increase. So that is the homestead exemption portion of it. And then there's the SPLOST portion of it, the floating local option sales tax portion. And so in order for that to be, and it has to be a ballot initiative. So in order for that even to be placed on the ballot, the taxing entity has to agree to opt in to the homestead exemption. If they opt out of the homestead exemption, it also is a bit convoluted in how it works. And the whole thing is, we were talking about the school board portion being 70% of our taxes. Personally, I believe that the school board is going to opt out, that they will not I just don't see them opting in, because they will not benefit at all from the SPLOST funds. Correct. Because they already have SPLOST in place. And according to state law, you can only have one, special sales tax, and they have SPLOST. So at any rate, and this is just from reading the bill from last night, there are now been created 159 special districts in the state of Georgia, which are the boundaries of each county. We have 159 counties. And so the counties, and this is where some of the confusion came in last night and what we were discussing on Drain the Creek. the person who was talking was saying, oh, well, all of the taxing entities within the special district have to opt in order to, even put this FLOST on the ballot. Well, what it is the county is the only one that can put the FLOST on the ballot. And so the county has to opt in, because if they haven't opted in, then they don't have the right to put the FLOST on the ballot. So if the county opts in and they put the FLOST on the ballot, then they create, with the other entities that have opted in, an intergovernmental agreement on how to split that FLOST money. And the FLOST money can only be used to offset property taxes. It cannot be used for any other reason. And so I was thinking about it myself. I was like, that in and of itself may be a reason, because the citizens will have to vote on the FLOST, even though it goes, okay, we're going to put the FLOST on the ballot. If the citizens don't pass it, then it doesn't go on.
Yeah.
Well,
So then if we have somebody in the county, say one of the cities chooses to opt out, they still can benefit from FLOST funds.
see, that's where
That's where it gets really confusing, because what happens if you have to really dig into the bill, because it's pretty far into the bill. And I didn't realize it till I read the whole bill yesterday, that if a taxing entity chooses not to opt in, so for that portion of the taxes, their homesteaded citizens will not receive that cap on their assessments. They can still go up and down. However, they can still participate in the FLOST funds in a ratio that is proportionate to their portion of the population of the county. So Ringgold has about 5% of the population of the county. So as I understand it, they could, even if they opted out on the homestead portion, then they could still receive up to 5% of the revenues of the FLOST. For Fort Oglethorpe, that would be about 15%, I think, because their population is about 15% of the total population of the county.
So the number, though, there was a number. You said the population, if one of the cities opted out, so let's say the county stays in and one of the cities opts out, it could still go in and be a FLOST.
Right, because and for the FLOST, the county has to opt in, because they are the entity that's allowed to put the FLOST on the ballot. The cities don't have the power to put a FLOST on the ballot that would only be to the benefit of the cities. They can't do that. And so the confusion came in where the individual who was speaking said, oh, well, all three entities have to opt into the homestead exemption before this can happen. And my interpretation of reading of the bill is that is simply not the case. That the county, because they're the ones who put the FLOST on the bill, that they are the ones who have to opt in. You don't opt in, you don't have the opportunity to put the FLOST on the ballot, and the citizens don't have a choice to either accept or reject that FLOST.
So with that, the way I had heard it, and see here again, this is why it's been so complicated for citizens to understand this stuff, is that the county is in and one of the cities opted out, then the FLOST, the opportunity to put up to a 1 cent sales tax,
Right.
would be dead if one of the cities opted out. And what you said, and this is what was in the bill, is what you're saying, that as long as the combination of the county and cities representing greater than 50% of the county's total population opt in, then the county's eligible for a FLOST.
Right.
So in that example, let's say Ringgold opts in, county opts in, Fort O says we're going to opt out.
Right.
We still have the opportunity at that point
Right.
for a FLOST, and that was
Right.
not what I had been told or heard going along. I heard it had to be all three. The school's their own thing; they don't.
Right.
So they opt out, doesn't impact the penny.
Right.
So with the penny, and this is what I've said: pennies are harder now. So look at SPLOST and the percentage it's passed. This last time, the margin was more narrow, right? For and against. People are tired of pennies in a way, right? Because they're promised what a penny will do.
Right.
Back to your point, Nick. and they don't see that penny being spent wisely or doing what they said it was going to do. And so they've lost confidence in the penny. Now,
Well,
this penny is great because it's got to be spent
Right.
on your property
Because
taxes.
that's often what we hear from the people who are pushing the SPLOST is, if you pass this SPLOST, we will reduce your property taxes.
Well, right. That is
And,
the message.
and that's
never the trade-off.
and it's never the trade-off. With the floss, that's different because the law specifically says that the floss can only be used to reduce property taxes. It cannot be used for any other purpose.
No capital projects.
Yeah, no capital projects,
And that's
anything
right.
like
And
that.
it has to all be spent.
And it
They
has to
can't
all be
decide they're
spent.
going to put 6 months back
Right.
or whatever. No, hey, we
And-
collected this much, it
Exactly.
gets put out.
And the other thing with the floss that makes it similar to our other SPLOSTs is that it is for a 5-year term. It sundowns at the end of the 5 years. If they don't put another floss on the ballot, that would then currently be good for 5 years. Also, at that point, the state delegation also has to agree to put that additional floss back on the ballot to have a new floss.
That's right. So
And-
if it's working, it can continue.
It can
If
continue.
your representative that you have in
Right.
play, if your
Right.
representative says no,
No, it's not
done.
working. Yeah, it's
that's
done. It's done. And so those types of details, I didn't know till I went through and read the bill yesterday.
Sure.
And I didn't know until I went through and read the ACCG guidelines on it. And it is confusing because if you only read like the first couple of screens, it says, well, all of these things have to happen in order for someone to participate. But then if you read down further to the end of the screens, that's where it gets more into the nitty gritty. The other thing is, just because the bill has passed and it becomes effective on January 1st, we don't have the rules on how to implement the bill. So every law in the state of Georgia and elsewhere has rules that go along with it. And those rules govern how that bit of law is put into play. And so you not only have the law that says you can do X, Y, Z, you have the rule that says this is how you implement that law. And so we don't have those rules yet to know exactly how it's going to play out. So it is all in flux. And please do keep in mind that what I wrote, and I try and put that out there, this is my interpretation of what I've read.
Sure, yeah.
But so that's why I try to put the links in so somebody else can go back and they can read it for themselves, and then we can sit down and we can have these kinds of discussions and say, well, I read it and this is what I understood out of it. You might read it and you can find you might glean something differently out of it than I do. And so we can sit down and we can have those discussions. And we can also then, you might say something that causes me to go, oh yeah, I never thought about that. And Nick, you are so good at doing that for me. With the research that you do, I'll go, oh my gosh, I had not a clue. And that makes me think, and I'll go, well, I have this question or that question. And so that's, but this floss, it's very confusing. And the thing I think that is most confusing is because it's two separate things
Sure.
that were addressed in the same bill. And that was actually
kind of three things if you look at it. I mean, because you've got the referendum that was put on there.
Right.
This is already passed.
Right.
Now the decision there with the county
Right.
thing, and then that of the 1 cent that has to go back
that
out
has
for
to
the
go
people.
right. And it's
So what's
exactly.
your thoughts? Do you think if the penny gets put on a ballot, up to a penny, let's just say they ask for the full penny, do you think it'll pass?
I don't think our school systems are going to opt in, so.
Well,
But the schools,
Well, no, but
it's the
won't
county.
It's
really
the county,
matter.
the
Do you
county
think
and
the
the cities.
citizens will go out to the polls and vote to put that penny on?
If they are properly educated on it.
And I think so
That's
too.
the
I mean,
issue.
whenever you look at this, this is the first time ever that you see a tax that truly will benefit the taxpayer,
Exactly.
the property
That
owner
is-
that's
yep.
paying the taxes, who is carrying a larger burden sometimes, especially whenever you're looking at this from a widow standpoint or whatever. And some people even say that this is going to negatively affect that of the senior citizens because of that penny sales increase on their food and their groceries and things like that. But that's what's interesting to me as I'm watching some of the dynamics and the discussions that's here, especially from the other side with that of the government and some people that are in the government that are saying these things, that it's going to negatively impact. I know Mr. Ward and I have had this discussion as well. But the thing is that I see is that they're not really saying anything about this negatively impacting these citizens whenever they're doing the SPLOST or they're doing the eSPLOST. So in some ways, that's almost like a pushback from the government saying that, well, this might be, affecting them negatively in this way or this way. Now we're going to kind of get down to a granule and look at how it's going to affect this citizen. But you never do that with the other 1 cent sales taxes.
Well, and I think the difference between the FLOST, the SPLOST, and the eSPLOST is that the FLOST is, in law, dedicated to reducing property taxes.
Right.
It can't be used for anything else, and we somehow manage with the eSPLOST and the SPLOST to have it somehow get used for things that we weren't told it was going to be used for. And there is no, I mean, that goes back to the, if you pass a SPLOST, we're not going to raise your property taxes.
That's right.
And so that's where
It's still there's still going to be a tax that would be there, because if you look
Right.
at lost and the percentage of lost that we see, that's the measure, that's the measuring tool for any 1 cent sales tax is that lost, right? That then tells you that percentage of what you're getting in. You can pretty much equate that to the next, the FLOST,
Right.
the eSPLOST, or the SPLOST,
SPLOST, yeah.
right? You can see that loss that we always have, that's
Yeah.
always part of our taxation. That sales tax is a representation of what's going to be received. So
Yeah.
you're looking at the lost right now, and you look at our budget and the little pie chart that Rachel does, which is great. I think Rachel does an excellent job on presentation of our budget. That shows you that lost percentage that's there, which is around about 42%, I think. And then you've got 51% on property tax. So what you're going to see is if you've got 43% that's coming in at lost, that now is going to eat up that pie piece of property tax.
yeah.
That's going to be from 43. Now you're only going to have, what, about 6%, 7% that you're going to have to pay the county on your tax.
Yeah,
For
so
your property.
I think FLOST, right?
Yeah.
I think some of it gets rubbed off from SPLOST
Yeah.
onto FLOST, right? Because FLOST it's going to go 100%, right, to help that portion of your bill,
Right.
city, county. And so that helps, right?
Right.
Which is what we all want. We want some relief. But I think SPLOST kind of rubs a little wrong way,
Right.
and that may impact that. But
And so that's where education
Sure.
before the fact
yeah, definitely.
plays a huge role.
It's a second penny, and I had Dina sitting in the chair you're at, Nick, talking about what eSPLOST does. But what are your thoughts as citizens? Do you think that penny does what it's supposed to do? And when that penny comes up in 2026, what do you think citizens' reactions to eSPLOST is going to be?
It may be negative in the comparison to what you see from the SPLOST standpoint and the way that they promote it. I think the school is going to have a challenge in this from the standpoint of being able to show that we're not like the county in this aspect, right? This is truly our legitimate. This is truly how we're expending our capital expenditures and getting ahead of the game and being able to educate the public and not doing what I saw anyways, in what we saw with the 3 meetings that they had for raising the taxes. They really need to start focusing more and thinking that they've got the numbers in the game or whatever that they're thinking. They need to really focus on what the people are, because there's this different dynamic that's happening in our country, in our states, in our cities, and our county here, that people are awakening to these. We're not stupid, and don't treat us as stupid. If we can't have these conversations and we can't have this dialogue to where it is productive and it is positive outcome for both parties, both people, and even Miss Susie that has the retired widow lady, which I'll continue to bring that up, because those are the least of us. And if you look at scripture, who are we called to serve? We're called to serve the widow and we're called to serve the orphans. So let's look at that from that standpoint first and being our base of who we're taking care of in this county first and foremost. If they do what's needed in being able to educate, like what Debbie's saying, then they would have a much better chance. If they would come along and have citizen dialogue like this, if they would come along and share their projects, I know that they benefit from it from a standpoint of facilities and management of facilities with capital projects. I understand that from an operational standpoint. If they don't have that SPLOST, then there's going to be some issues that they may have in being able to pay for these expenditures that they've got to be able to maintain from a capital sense, which means that they would then increase their budget again and so on and so forth. But I don't want to hear that as a threat anymore. I am sick and tired of my government telling me if I don't do this, we're going to raise your property. We're going to do this to you if you don't do this.
Yep.
And that was the other thing. How is it that you can have a vote on a board, have a vote, but you better vote yes or you're going to go to jail? I saw that with Charlie Stevenson during that time period, you know? If you don't agree with this, then we're going to actually threaten you with jail time, with the possibility of jail time if you don't vote yes.
Well, and I know
That's
that
ridiculous.
the argument there was, well, the law says we have to vote yes, we have to approve this. The law does not say you have to vote yes on the first go around.
So what you're talking about there, for folks that maybe not as acute, is the school board had their budget. They had their 3 meetings. They said, hey, this is what we got to do to make our budget, make our numbers. They presented, but it has to go before the county
Commission
commissioners,
to vote
and
on
the
it,
county
yeah.
commissioners have to vote on it. And the county commissioners basically said, listen, you know, we're just required to basically, we don't have any pushback, right? In other words, you know, it is what it is.
Right.
We've just got to say yes, and that goes
Right.
back to them. And citizens like yourself said, whoa, 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 that's not the case. And there was things saying, listen, if they go over 20 mills, there's caps there. 14 if they go under, they lose state funding.
Yeah.
If they go over 20, then the county can come back and say, wait a minute, that's too much taxation on the citizens. You've got to go back to the drawing board.
Well, even at that, then the county has the ability to say, okay, we're going to put this millage rate on the ballot. And the commissioners were giving the impression that they were the ones who could say no to anything above 20 mills. In actuality, the state constitution says that at that point, the commissioners are obligated to put it on a referendum, and it is the citizens who then say, yes, you can go above 20 mills, or no, you can't go above 20 mills.
Oh, well, come on. I mean, listen, we're all pretty smart enough to know. You're like, hey, do you want to have a higher tax increase? Vote yes or no.
Right,
I mean,
right.
You know, but yeah, it goes out there. But that was the whole thing is what you were saying, Nick, is if you don't vote yes, then there's some legal ramifications to that, and so that was kind of floated around as well.
And the other thing is that the law actually says it is a recommended rate from the school board.
I see the law. Come on,
see,
law.
Well, I had the same conversation with them last year.
Yeah.
Debbie went to that meeting because I was at the school board meeting because they held them at the same time. Last year, I was at the Board of Commissioners meeting and brought up this same exact issue. The state law says you may. It's permissive. You can approve that, and that means you can disapprove it.
Yep.
And so I went in, I spoke to them. They looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I handed them a copy of the statute.
Yep.
And I explained the statute, went through the statute with them, and then they just approved whatever the school board did. However, after that, I got a call from a reporter for the Catoosa County News, and she said that she had gone to the chairman and said, hey, you know, I saw the meeting. You didn't listen to Miss Lawson at all. What have you got to prove your point? Because she brought you the law. What have you got to prove your point? And so he got back to her with 2 case cites from the county attorney. And I went and looked up the case cites and I read them. And I said, well, that's very fascinating. That is 3 constitutions ago that those case cites are based upon.
Yep.
What the Constitution said at that point is not what the Constitution says at this point. So those case cites don't mean anything. And then I went in front of the Board of Commissioners after that. I mean, we were there.
Yep.
I'm like, those case cites don't mean anything.
Well, and like this year when I spoke, it's based on the cases that they're citing are based on the 1873 Constitution. The state of Georgia in total has had 10 constitutions, and it's not just amendments to the Constitution. We have had 10 constitutions where the previous constitution was fully repealed,
Right.
and then we have a new constitution in place. So those cases are based on the 1873 Constitution.
Yeah, it was several constitutions ago.
And so at that point, the school millage rate was between 1 and 5 mills. My thing is, if you're going to base this on the 1873 Constitution, we can't just go half-hearted.
Yeah, right.
You know,
yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go full
Let's
screen.
go full. Let's
I'm
go
ready
full.
for it. Let's
Yeah,
go.
and
Because
have
they
our
approved
school.
one at what 14.87 million
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that. So yeah,
I said,
1 to
you know,
5.
let's go back. If we are going to say
1 to
we
5.
have to follow the 1873 Constitution, we follow the 1873 Constitution, and we have our school millage rate between 1 and 5 mils. And I know that that's pushing the envelope.
Well, sure. It's just making a point.
It's making a point. And like Christine said, this is a binary choice. If you can vote yes, you can vote no.
Absolutely.
And
if
so,
you're going to justify yourself with the law, then please bring me correct law.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you've told me you have zero justification for what you're doing other than somebody threatening one of our commissioners saying you're going to go to jail if you don't vote for this.
But at the end of the day, I think what happens most of the time, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I always try to look at it from an average citizen perspective. The school board budget, pretty much every year, it's kind of like the whole school board thing. Nobody really, and school board members, right, being elected or whatever, those races really didn't have a lot of focus on them. It wasn't broke, don't need to fix it kind of mentality,
well,
right?
and those races take place in May. They are a general election, but they take place in conjunction with the primary. So people don't know that when they're voting for school board members, that is the election. They don't get another opportunity in November.
Right.
And so our elections take place in May, and budget talks don't take place until August. And I think you and I talked about this a little bit too, that even for the county, budget talks aren't taking place until right before the election. Or right before the budget is due, rather.
But they're after the primaries.
But those are after the primaries. But it's
that's
also retroactive because what the budget, the tax rate that you're setting that's due on December 20th actually is going to be charged for the whole year, but you only have that short period of time to come up with the extra funds when there's a tax increase. So you and I were kind of talking about, in my opinion, we need to move those budget talks earlier in the year,
Well,
and for no
wouldn't it
other
be-
reason than to give people extra time to come up with the money to pay the taxes on December 20th. That's another
It
side
is.
discussion.
And then you
but-
could also say, well, it's like my election. I had a Democratic challenger.
Right.
Right. So, I was running from March, right, Jimmy? We were running, and then I had to run all the way to November. And the school board runs
to me,
nonpartisan.
nonpartisan.
Right. So, in other words, they're never going to have a challenger that's
Right.
going to end up being like a Republican Democrat on a
Right.
November ballot.
Right. Because the final election is in May.
Yeah, and so it's nonpartisan. So you've had people float that around, right? Well, maybe if it's partisan, then there's chance that those elections go
Right.
on and all that. But like obviously, nobody wants to think that they're sitting around a table like we are saying, well, why don't we put these here for
Right.
this reason or whatever? This is based off our calendar year. I mean, you want to assume the best in everything, right?
Well, actually, I was doing some research last night about that very thing, and until 1993, we had partisan school board elections that were held in November.
We did.
And also, until around that same time, we elected our superintendent. After that, 1993, it was a local action at the state level that moved the elections back to May, made them nonpartisan for the school board. And at that same time, the superintendent who was last elected, he served out his term, and then after that term was over, then the school board took over and began to appoint the superintendent. And so these kinds of things that are enacted now weren't just like with the state constitution in 1873. They're not what has always been in the past. So those things can change over time.
There's two races that, to me, I don't know that I'd feel as comfortable for the citizens voting on a popularity contest. I would want to make sure it's somebody with the right qualifications. So the first one's sheriff. Now, it is an elected position.
It is.
But my goodness, you know.
You don't hear
what-
anything about who's running for sheriff, though.
Well, no, listen, Gary's a great guy. Gary does a great job. But my point is, let's say Gary was gone tomorrow and we had people running. You would want to have somebody had some qualifications, not just like, well, that's just Joe Blow and he's kind of a nice guy and let's put him in there. I mean, this is our safety going on, right? And I see behind the scenes all the things that Gary does that are above and beyond. You know, just doing the job, you know, because y'all talk about it, like if you have a board of commissioner person and you're like, they're just up there going through the motions, right? They're not putting the amount of attention and detail and effort that needs to be in the job. Lord, I wouldn't want that in my sheriff, right? Because that would really be catastrophic. School board superintendent. Yeah, I wouldn't want that to be based off of necessarily a popularity contest. And I know that the back and forth, I would want to make sure it's somebody that it's good at doing that job, right? Maybe it wasn't the best teacher. You know, you could have been a phenomenal teacher, but you could be a bad manager. You know, and I've seen that. You know, we've had great employees, and you promote them up, find out they're just great employees, but they're not necessarily great managers. So I don't know. There's a push and pull there, right? Should it be elected or not? Because we want to make sure we've got the right person in there. And who better than a board, maybe, that are in there that know that we have the right person.
And there's some here. The dynamics of that is just in that if you're looking at it from the standpoint of business, right? But what I see in this county is a lot of times boards, and you've probably been understand this as well, when boards are appointed by that board of elected people that we have in our office, that a lot of times that is still biased based upon popularity. And or like I've seen the resumes. I know the resumes. I know the people that have applied to some of these positions. And whenever you choose someone that is lower qualified than this upper tier person, and actually Dina Reese was one of them for Public Facilities Authority, they did not vote for her. She put her resume in. And the one person in this county that probably had the most experience, the highest knowledge of facilities, and I sat and heard her on your show here, saying, you know, how many schools, transportation that she was over,
stuff, right?
all of this, right? That she was that's her qualifications. Her speaking on this, I was listening to it, I was like, wow, yeah, she was super qualified, and she wanted to serve on this Public Facilities Board, and no one on that board chose her. Instead, they voted for two people that were subpar qualified, even to the other candidates that applied. So your rationale is just if you have an unbiased people of committee that does look at it from a business standpoint and that of protecting the shareholders, which in this case, whether it's school board or commissioners, the shareholders is us, the public.
Yeah, no, I've talked about that.
Right.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about that here for a second too. Is yes, and I've got a list of upcoming boards, right? There are going to be people, and I've said all along, two things on that. It upsets me, and I know it's upset all of y'all. One is when we put it out, and they put it out. We're seeking somebody for a library board. Let's just use that as an example. And you have folks that online you'll see saying, I turned in an application. You know, I'm a stay-at-home mom now. Maybe I used to be a teacher or whatever, and I've got a passion, and I really want to put back into the community, and I miss that. There's a hole in my life, and I want to give back. And so you go by, and then all of a sudden it's like, this person over here got it. And then you say, well, what were their qualifications? And then you look, and you're like, well, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But the biggest thing is, if 20 people applied, 19 people never heard a word. They didn't get anything back. If you go interview for a job, at least you want to have somebody call you back, right? And say, Jimmy, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. We've kind of gone this direction, but, you know, listen, you've got, you know, some great qualifications and this, that, and the other, and maybe here's some things that you didn't have, and this is why we didn't choose you. You want to know that because you want to better yourself, right? Maybe there's something I can work on for the next time.
Especially when we're wanting to serve the public in that capacity, right?
You're just wanting to give to your community, but you don't get that dialogue back, right? And I think that's just broken. I mean, if all four of you applied for a position, and Nick, I gave it to you, I owe it to you three to personally communicate with you why I didn't go that direction. And, you know, but those conversations are hard. And I've always said, people it's easy to give the easy conversation. The good news, I'm chomping at the bit to call you, right? I'm dreading these 3 calls, right?
Right.
And there's some people that just aren't wired to where they can just deal with that. And I think if you're going to be in a leadership position, you've got to be able to have those tough conversations. I'm sure you 4 will come back. And by then I'll be in office, and there's going to be some things I do that you don't agree with. And I'm okay sitting in front of you 4 and you, Christine saying, well, why did you do that, right? I owe that to you, right? Because you're just 4 citizens just like the rest of the county that I serve. And I owe it to you to do that, right? And to have those uncomfortable conversations, it's okay. That's what we're supposed to do, right? And if you don't have the ability to do that, in my opinion, you shouldn't seek to serve because you're doing a disservice to the county, right? And to the citizens. So yeah, boards are a big thing that, it's something so simple it seems like, but we miss great opportunities because if we put the right people on those boards, it helps elevate the county.
Absolutely.
Right? Because we're putting the right people in place. If I'm hiring, I want to hire the most qualified person because I want my company to excel.
Right.
And so, this person over here, and that's what gets talked about. Well, they were a big donor in my campaign.
Yep.
Or they're a friend of a friend of a friend, and they called me up and said, hey, I really like to see my friend Sue on that board, right? And so sometimes the citizens push back, or that's where the decisions are getting made. It's who you know, not what you know.
Right.
That's right.
Well, let's hope you'd start interviewing all the candidates for all these board positions.
I have no problem sitting there, and I would think, and I don't know how it works yet, but we're sitting around and we're talking about it, right? And we're saying, okay, here's the 10 people for this position, and let's talk about what we see and what that, right? That's what you should do, right, Jimmy?
It is. Several people go uninterviewed, and that's a shame.
Well, I had gotten the feedback from a person one time whenever I applied for the Public Facilities Board as well, whenever that was there. So I knew all the candidates that were part of it. Whenever I asked one of the commissioners, why did you vote? Why did you not vote for me? Right? I just wanted to know what was it that
feedback, right?
Yeah. And between me and the other 2 candidates that were chosen, I was told that I didn't have economic development experience. Well, nor did the other 2, but this is a public facilities authority, not an economic development board, right? So that immediately said, you know what? There's no way unless you are pre-chosen in a way or a manner to know, because on that board, it was the person that was chosen was the neighbor of Chuck Harris and Derek Rogers, who is on the board for, he's actually a city councilman in Fort Oglethorpe, right? It's supposed to be 2 public positions. Even in that sense, Derek's in government, right? That should have been afforded to a public person, not somebody that's in another form of government. That's 2 people that should have been on that board with those 3 commissioners that would be able to hold them accountable. But it's not the case, and it's bias, and I'll say it like it is. And I've got the evidence to show, and I'll show that on Watchdog eventually whenever I get around to putting it. I will show that, and I'll make it known to the public, because that's where the public needs to know.
Yeah, well, I think the perfect example is when you talk about Dina. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
my gosh, I mean, she sat right there. And when I said, tell folks, why is SPLOST important? Because that penny, you of all people can speak to that penny. And she laid it out. She didn't hesitate, didn't miss a beat. She laid out exactly what it goes for, right? And that's what you want. So when you get somebody like that has that kind of knowledge, and you think, man, why did they, maybe there was somebody who had a little more knowledge than her. It's like, okay, but who is that, right? But, I mean, you want to know.
I
So
can
you lose
understand if she
confidence.
beat me out. I can understand if Dee beat
If
me
she'd
out.
have beat you out, right, you'd have been like, hey, you don't
knowing that she knows
understand.
facilities and she knows transportation and she has all this that she's managed before. And here locally in this county, she was the perfect person, perfect candidate, and was not chosen. That was one of those flags that whenever that was raised, I knew that it was bias.
But if I called Jimmy and said, Jimmy, hey, you apply for that, Nick, if I called you for it and said, listen, thanks for applying, and we've chosen Dina Reese, and here's the qualifications you brought, I don't think I'd hung up the phone with any 4 of you, and you thought, okay, yeah, I just got out late, right? I mean, you got to put in your best player, and that'd be okay, right?
Yeah.
You'd feel like, okay, good, you'd feel good, and you'd hang up, and you'd think, wow, that's kind of, I was really looking forward to maybe serving, but I understand that. I'll just look
I
for the
would've
next one
chose
that
her,
comes up.
you know?
Yeah, and that's what we expect, right? And that's where we lose a little disconnect in government and citizens and all that. Well, look, as much as I know we could keep going, the batteries, I've been told, are about to die.
Well, that's okay.
So, look forward to
been fun.
doing this again.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, because I think this is the dialogue we need to have, and folks watching to get educated, or all the things that go on, and what started you for specifically in getting involved in local government, right? Because that's important. We want folks to be involved, but I think a lot of times, some folks would just prefer folks weren't involved, right? Because it's a little easier. But I mean, the pain brings it in, right? And the pain of property taxes, or the pain of, a facility coming in that you don't agree with and shouldn't be there. And all, there's all kinds of pain points that bring us forward, but we've just got to do these things, right? And, it'd be nice if you four could go on and just do something else with your lives, because you're like, hey, they got this. Right? It's kind of like Dina on the facilities. It's like, I'm not going to keep up with facilities because Dina's got this. I'm going to just go to the house. I can enjoy time doing other things with family or whatever. I can pick up a new hobby, right? Unfortunately, we're just not to that point.
I can remember the first time going to a meeting and my wife going with me and my daughter going with me, me bringing them. For so long, I was going alone, going to these meetings. And then to have them to come with me, it was something special. But it's not something that we want to do. Me and my wife spent our anniversary day one year. And there's it's last year. Not this, it's last year. Because we took a picture. This is our anniversary day. Is going to a meeting. And that's the sacrifice that we never get paid for. We never get anything in return. But to note that it's people within our communities need to be involved, and having it to where the information is gathered and being able to be diffused throughout the county, so the public then makes a better choice in their leadership and being able to go through this.
And I think, I made a point of, I feel like, my role might be education, and you've said something about that, but even just sitting here listening to everybody, all of us are doing that, not necessarily going, it's my job to do this, but in everything that each one of us does, we are educating not only ourselves, but hoping to educate other people. And I think on the side of the government, one of the big things is then asking for transparency in return.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, you guys need to be educated too. And sometimes that comes from us. Sometimes that comes from your own work. Hopefully it's a big combination of everything. But I do, truly listening to all of this, I think one of the motivating factors is to make sure knowledge is out there so that people can make their own decisions in an informed manner.
Knowledge is the power.
And knowledge is the power.
That's
exactly.
the power to anybody. James Madison said, where knowledge will forever govern ignorance. And for a people to be their own governors, they must use the power in which knowledge gives. If you go into something ignorant and not knowing, you're making a poor decision right off the bat. If you go into something, just take an exam for it. You go in unprepared, you're going to fail.
Sure.
Well, if we continue to go unprepared and going into things ignorantly in this country, in this county, then we're going to be blinded to whatever's to come.
Yeah.
We need to be prepared, and we need to have the people need to have the power, and the only way to have the power is to have the knowledge. And that's what I think that we all want to do is diffuse that knowledge.
Any parting thoughts?
Thank you for the
sums it up.
opportunity.
No, hey, we'll do it again. I think we all enjoyed it.
Great.
Yeah, this is fun.
Thanks for watching, and until next time, have a great week.